3 Republicans running in the primary for state treasurer: Andrew Cooperrider, Mark Metcalf, and O.J. Oleka. This is from a viewer, and I'm going to, of course, kind of enhance this question. They ask, where do you stand on state funds being used for critical race theory and diversity, equity, inclusivity education? And we know, Mr. Cooperrider, by looking at your website, that you do have some statements about, I will just quote, woke policies. That may not be the term that you used. Mr. Metcalf, you talk about woke investment banks. And Mr. Oleka, you also talk about expanding the list of banks and financial institutions in regard to ESGs, environmental, social, and governance. Are all those the same thing as critical race theory? And I want to go to you, Mr. Metcalf, first to clarify that.
Thank you, Renee, for the question. Let's go first of all to ESG, as you put it. Is ESG part of wokeism? I don't think so. I think that it is we look at wokeism as being critical race theory. We look at it as being diversity, equity, and inclusion as being wokeism. We also have associated with that the LGBTQ movement. Do I favor the application of state funds to teach critical race theory and diversity, equity, inclusion education? Absolutely not. Now,
we know that critical race theory is not being taught in any K through 12 schools at this current time.
That is correct. It's against the law in Kentucky. Now, I favor that. I believe that critical race theory is a corrosive ideology that accuses one group of Americans from being hostile to another group of Americans simply because of race. I think that's wrong. I know it's wrong. And let me also add, you ask about woke banks. Look, when banks tell Kentuckians that we don't want you to mine coal, we don't want you to drill oil, we don't want you to harvest natural gas, and we're going to put you out of business by essentially condemning those businesses, that's wokeism in the government, in the investment bank sense. And what I want to do is divest us from those banks and make certain that we have people investing the monies of Kentucky who are friendly to a profitable return to our pension holders. That's what we should be doing with our investment banks. We shouldn't be scoring based upon political correctness. We should be scoring investments based upon, do they provide a profitable return?
And is that currently happening with the board that's overseeing the pension funds, that they're actually scoring based on diversity, equity, inclusion, or wokeness?
Yes, ma'am. I think so. But I think the investment banks have also gone one step further. They're wanting to put fossil fuels out of business. And let's give you an example. Let's go to the Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank had 2 members, one of whom, or 2 of whom, had both given more than $50,000 each to the presidential ambitions of Hillary Clinton. They had no training whatsoever to be on a bank board, no accounting, no finance. Another was an LGBTQ activist. Now, he had no training to be on that bank board. We need to be putting people in positions where investments are made that know what they're doing. Now, Kentucky has an only 6% return on investment. That's the 48th lowest return on investment in the nation on its investment, on its pension funds. We can do better than that.
So, Mr. Oleka, I think you agree somewhat with Mr. Metcalf when it comes to OSGs, or ESGs, the environmental and social governance. You agree?
I do agree. And for me, all of these things are personal. When we talk about ESG getting into our pension system, my late father was a public professor at Kentucky State University. He passed away in 2016. My mother is the beneficiary of his pension. I shudder to think if our pension systems were involved in ESG getting lower returns because they weren't focused on ROI. So for me, as the next state treasurer, I'll fight every single day to make sure people like my mother get the proper return, the proper result of what they're supposed to get with their pensions. I'll fight for every Kentuckian like they were my own mother, because in this case they would be.
Would you fight for a cost of living increase with the same vigor as you would the ESGs?
Well, I think exactly the thing that we need from a state treasurer is to work with our pension board, to work with the pensioners, and to work with the General Assembly to make sure we've got all the resources that we need to provide everything that our pensioners need. This is important to me. As I mentioned, my mother was involved in this. Now, you also talked about CRT. I think it's incredibly important that we understand what this is. CRT is a worldview. It is this belief that if you look at all the issues going on in the world, The problem is specifically based on race. There's some history of racism involved. That's just not simply what I believe. That's also not my history. As I mentioned before, and as I say to every single Republican audience that I get the chance to, my parents came here and lived the American dream. It was white missionaries that gave my parents the opportunity to come to this country. One of my favorite teachers, Miss Hunt, an 8th grade teacher, she was the first teacher that told me that I was a leader, that people, if I said something that was important, people would listen to me. This is a white woman. You mentioned Treasurer Allison Ball, also a white woman who gave me the opportunity of a lifetime to be Chief of Staff and who has endorsed me in this campaign. When I think about something like CRT, if this was going on when I was a kid, there's no way that I could be as successful as I am now. If there were a bunch of teachers, a bunch of leaders, a bunch of people who told me that because of the color of my skin, I couldn't be successful. So as the nominee, as the next state treasurer, we need somebody who can fight against it, somebody who can be a leader on it, somebody who can bring people over to our side because they want to see somebody who can lead and somebody they can believe in.
But Mr. Oleka, you were very involved in a bill that even formed a commission, the Commission on Race and Opportunity, that was in response to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and the social justice movement of 2020. So how do you reconcile your activity with that commission and what you're espousing tonight?
Easy. My opinion has always been this. Racism is bad. Diversity is good. Equal opportunity is best.
So if you are an anti-racist, are you woke?
No. This is my opinion of anti-racism. It's somebody who believes that everybody deserves the same opportunity regardless of your background. That very organization that you mentioned, that coalition, they helped pass the pro-life bill. It was HB 212 that year, sponsored by Representative Heavrin. And as a result, we now focus in Kentucky on the maternal mortality of women as well as babies. Because my interest is that if we're going to be honest as a Republican Party, we need to be pro-life across the board. We need to value kids. We need to value babies and mothers. That's my position. I think you can do that and lead in the Republican Party in a strong way.
So, Mr. Cooperrider, I want to come to you because on your website, you talk about that government is funding too much of the wrong things. And one of the things you point out is equity coaching for state staffers at the tune of $4,769,237. You say that state spending on DEI is, quote, out of control. Expound on that, sir.
So first, I want to explain what DEI is. DEI is rolling in the LGBTQ kind of gender theory mixed with the critical race theory diversity rolled into one initiative. Frankly, I don't care what gender you are. I don't care what skin color you are. I care that you can do the job. And every dollar we spend trying to somehow seek out and find people based upon their skin color or gender is completely wasted. We should be about the results to our taxpayers and continuing to spend money social engineering. Also, that creates a lot of, we have a lot of division going on in our country and our state. And a large part of this is because we take each other's money and we spend it forwarding things we certainly don't all agree on. And earlier when I talked about out of control spending, you acknowledged that diversity, equity, inclusion in your question is something that Republicans, at least now, are fighting on, including, and that's included in ESG. The S part of ESG is social. That's the DEI stuff. And Republicans are fighting on this. And that's why I point to, I don't believe the legislature knows this spending is going on because they're not taking steps to fight it and to end it. And that's, as state treasurer, what I want to do. And I think it's incredibly important that we're consistent on this. As you pointed out, Mr. Oleka, he was very forward on this issue. In fact, 2 weeks before declaring for office, he hosted Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit in Georgetown for higher education. You can't suddenly switch your viewpoint when you decide you now want to run as a conservative for state treasurer because this issue is now hot. You have to be consistent. This is an issue me has been consistent on for quite some time, going all the way back to protests that we put on for schools, about what they're teaching in the schools as far as that goes. And earlier you hit upon CRTs and being taught in the schools. Well, let me point out a policy that they're looking at in Fayette County right now. They looked at their late policy and they said, well, it looks like minorities are being punished at a higher rate than white children with our late policy. So that must mean it's racist. That is CRT. That is looking at something, seeing a racial difference in outcome and saying the thing itself must be racist. That is awful because it says a few things. One, it says to minorities, you can't be held to the same standards as white children because what they're saying is they got to change the standards for the minority children only and treat them differently. But at the same time, it robs us of solving the issue. Because I'd hazard to guess the actual issue isn't their skin color. Their actual issue is that they have single parent households. and that parent is probably working and they're unable to get onto the bus. And that's the problem that needs to be solved. Our late policy here in Fayette County for public schools doesn't need to be changed based upon a kid's skin color. It needs to be.
So the role of the state treasurer is to be involved in what Fayette County Public Schools is doing when it comes to addressing late arrival policies?
Understand, half of our state budget goes to K through 12 education. Tax dollars being taken from citizens and them being used to afford this is unacceptable. That has got to be reported to our legislature. If they are receiving state funds and it's something going against the values and views of Kentuckians that have put the Republican supermajority in the legislature, then it should be called out and reported to that legislature. So absolutely. If they're receiving state funds, it is absolutely within the state's purview to hold them accountable.